Welcome to the Senior Showcase. My name is Kelly Curtis. I'm the health promoter with the Canadian Mental Health Association for the Haliburton Kawartha Pine Ridge branch. I'd like to start out with a little bit of an introduction about the organization because I'm never too sure how many people have actually heard of us. We are a not-for-profit organization providing free mental health services for anybody ages 16 and up. We do have a lot of different programs and services. And so some of the programs will actually target people that might be a little bit under that age group, such as the program that I'm a part of, which is education. And we deal with a lot of different age groups. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So welcome to our session on dealing with isolation. Thanks for having me. So let's just jump right into it. What are we here to do today? We are here to talk about understanding some of those effects that isolation may be having on us, some of the physical and emotional effects, because it's always a good idea for people to be able to understand or recognize what they're experiencing, as well as to normalize that kind of a conversation. We'll also talk a little bit about some strategies and tips on how we might best deal with some of these feelings that we might be experiencing at this time. So the first thing that we'll talk about, let's talk about how to recognize the difference between social isolation and loneliness, because those are actually two different things. So when we talk about these, we want to try and highlight what the difference between social isolation might be compared to loneliness. So experts typically will study isolation and their causes and the impacts, and they always do like to kind of differentiate or distinguish between these two different terms. So, social isolation is an objective lack of social relationships or an infrequency of social contact. But loneliness is more of a subjective kind of feeling of isolation. So, a person, for example, could be socially isolated, but they might not feel lonely. Or a person might feel lonely when they're actually surrounded by people. But loneliness has been described as a mismatch between that quantity and the quality of social relationships that a person has as compared to what a person might actually want or what they would prefer to have. So it's that unwelcome feeling, that lacking companionship. Another way to think about it might be that distinction, just that distinction of a person that cannot be, you can't be isolated when you're in a crowded room, but you certainly could be lonely in that very same room. There's a lot of different circumstances that can cause people to be socially isolated, but social isolation also comes from that physical distancing and these measures that we're all experiencing that are necessitated by the current COVID-19 pandemic. So when we talk about these, I like to bring up some stats because I think that it's important for people to recognize that what we're experiencing right now is very normal and a lot of people are experiencing it. I think that can help to really normalize this conversation. So we're going to talk about some of the stats that have been taken up lately. So the percentage of those people saying that they have a good social life has dropped by more than half in 2019 to just 1 in 3 or 33% in 2020. That's pretty significant. 50% of Canadians are reporting a worsening mental health since the pandemic has begun. And 77% of Canadians report feeling negative emotions or those so-called negative emotions as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I always kind of I want to really explain that a little bit better. Negative emotions, I'm not sure that there really is such a thing as a negative emotion. Emotions are all very, very important, and we will all experience a lot of different emotions. But a lot of people will think that negative emotions are things like worried or anxious or bored or stressed. Those are some of those ones that people might label as a negative emotion, but all emotions are important. So, what are some of the effects of social isolation or loneliness? So, when we talk about social isolation or loneliness, so mental and physical health are very much interconnected. Social isolation's adverse health consequences range anywhere from sleeplessness to reduced immune function. So you might find that when you are feeling some of these more negative kind of emotions or low emotions, that you might actually get sick more frequently, or you might experience more aches and pains, things like that. Loneliness can also be associated with higher anxiety and more depression, or isolation and loneliness can also be linked to poor cardiovascular health, for example, or a lot lower cognitive functioning. Some effects of social isolation are really specific to pandemics and to other public health situations that are requiring people to physically distance. So, loneliness and depression can go hand in hand with anxiety or with fear about the dangers that are associated with the event that made physical distancing measures necessary to begin with. And plus, sometimes people might be experiencing other emotions as well as a result of this. So, things like anger or resentment about health and about the safety measures that they might personally feel are unnecessary or they're too restrictive. So even people that are really supportive of all of the measures that we have in place, they are supportive of all of the safety related isolation and quarantining, might still experience some frustration and some level of irritability. So this is just a really nice simple diagram to kind of help to explain that normal stress response that we might all be experiencing. So this is something that is actually really helpful in explaining what anxiety is. So when we talk about a normal stress response, we think about a situation that might be dangerous, for example. So an example that I like to use would be if I was walking down the street and I saw a bear. We can usually agree that that's going to be a dangerous situation, right? So if I'm walking down the street and I see that bear, one of the first things that's going to happen, all of those internal signals, your ears, your touch, your nose, your taste, your eyes, all of those allow your brain to very quickly register that there's a dangerous situation, right? So when our brain registers that danger, usually in about the first 30 milliseconds, it's going to shoot out some of those hormones into our body. And you'll notice a physiological effect here. So things like your heart rate's going to increase. You're going to become more alert. You're going to become way more perceptive. Your body might even physically tense. That actually is that fight or flight response. That's a really important response for us to have because if my body didn't respond that way, I might not realize that that bear or encountering that bear was a dangerous situation, which actually could result in me not surviving that encounter. So that fight or flight response is very, very important for our survival, and it's something that we do need to experience. So when we take that and we kind of shift it over into what is anxiety, well, anxiety is basically the same kind of flow chart, if you will, but there is no danger. Instead of seeing that bear, your body is still perceiving that there is something dangerous when there isn't. So all of those internal signals are still activated. Your brain is still registering danger, which is still causing that same physiological response, but there was no danger. So that's kind of the difference between that normal stress response versus the actual stress or anxiety. So, what are some ways that we can actually reduce loneliness during social isolation? So, let's talk about a few different strategies that you might already actually have some of these in place, which would be fantastic. But you can always try a few more. And a really important thing to remember when we do start to talk about some of the things that we can do to reduce our stress levels or to reduce anxiety or to deal with this isolation that we're all experiencing right now. Some of the things that one of the most important things for you to remember is that we are all very individual people. So, what we find to be stressful or how we experience isolation or how we experience stress will also be very much individualized. What might be stressful or difficult for me might be okay for another person, right? So, we all have different levels. So, that really does make sense when you think about of course, the strategies that we use for reducing our loneliness or during socialization, or the strategies that we might employ to reduce our stress levels, will also be very individual and very different. So it's really important to remember that because sometimes you might try a strategy or I might suggest something and you think, yep, I'm going to go try that. And then you do it and think, well, that didn't work. That just made me feel worse, right? So it's important that you remember if it doesn't work that time, it's okay. Put that up on a shelf, pick up another strategy, try that one. So the first strategy that we'll talk about is it's something that we would call recognize, identify, and accept. So it is important, recognize how you're feeling, and it's okay to name it, right? Put a name to it, name or recognize that emotion, identify the emotion. There really are no bad emotions, as I mentioned earlier. We are all going to experience at some point or another, we will experience loneliness and sadness, anger, happiness, but it's okay. One of the first steps to being able to regulate your emotions is to be able to recognize what they are and put a name to them. Identify what you're actually experiencing or what you're actually feeling, and then accept it for what it is. Okay, I am feeling lonely today, or I am feeling sad today. It's okay to name it, because that is the first step in being able to regulate those emotions, and it's the first step in being able to move towards being happier. So let's talk about some of the basics. So these are things that we would consider to be like the bedrock or the foundation of our emotions, right? So things like sleep. A lot of people will disqualify how important sleep is, or will not recognize how much sleep we actually do need to have. So the average adult probably needs anywhere between 7 to 9 hours. It ranges from person to person. But not only getting a good amount of sleep every night, but getting that amount of sleep every day at the same time. So having a really good habit of going to bed at the same time, getting out of bed at the same time, because it's your body's way of kind of resetting everything, right? And this is a tough one, because when people are feeling some of those other emotions, this might be one of your first signs. How do you recognize you're experiencing stress? Well, maybe now you're not sleeping, or maybe you get to sleep, but you're not able to stay asleep. So it's kind of a vicious circle. So really working hard to develop some really good sleep habits and some good sleep patterns. Nutrition is another part of it. Our physical health is very much tied in with our emotional, or our emotional health. So our mental health, I should say. So when we talk about nutrition, we want to make sure that we're getting the proper hydration. Water or other hydrating fluids are really, really important to us. But so are, getting the proper foods, and really feeding your body and thinking about it as feeding your body in a healthy way, feeding your mental health in a healthy way as well. So when we think of it that way, not just eating the right foods, but again, having those regular sleep habits and sleeping at the same or sorry, eating at the same time every day on a given day. And if you think about it, think about a time where maybe you had a situation that had happened, and afterwards you're like, wow, I really reacted negatively to that. I'm not sure why I overreacted. Think about how much sleep you had. Was it before you'd had something to eat or after you had something to eat? Because quite often we will notice that our reactions will really be different, and how we're feeling will really be very much dependent on how much sleep we've been getting and how we've been feeding our body. And then the third part of the basics that we would talk about would be something like exercise. So, exercise is really, really important to your physical overall health, not just your physical health, but again, anything that's good for your physical health is going to be good for that mental health as well. So, when we talk about exercise, things like walking and getting outside, and doing as much as you're able to do, even if it's chair yoga, stuff like that. These are some really great activities that can help you to kind of balance overall. So a couple of things actually will happen when we're exercising. One is that, some of those feel good hormones are being released into our bodies as we're exercising. So when this is happening, it just makes you feel overall less stress. It makes you feel better. But the other thing that'll happen is when we are exercising, we typically are focused on what's happening in the moment. So, in a sense, we're practicing a bit of mindfulness, which again is something that we can really use to help us to feel better. So, another strategy that we would talk about is that shifting focus or that perspective. So, really thinking about practicing some gratitude as an example. So, a nice, easy way to start out with this, there's all kinds of different ways that you can look at more. You can do some research on gratitude and find a lot of different strategies. But a nice, simple one for starting out might be that maybe at the end of every day, I'm going to think of what are 3 things that I am grateful for from today. Just pick 3 things that I'm happy that happened, or 3 things I'm grateful for. Even if it's something as simple as I'm grateful that I was able to get out of bed today. Something as simple as that. Immersing yourself in activities that you enjoy is another really positive strategy here. So we are all feeling the effects of the pandemic. So really working on finding activities that we actually enjoy. Typically what will happen is if we find that our day has become overwhelming with all these different things that we need to get through or we need to do, we take something away to kind of reduce the stress of the day. But if you think about what it is that you're actually taking away, it might actually be one of those activities that might be considered the bedrock for you, or it might be your anchor, I should say. So really think about what it is that you're going to remove from your day's schedule, because it could be an activity that you need to keep you on that even keel. So if, for example, you're using yoga, or you have a 30-minute yoga session that you try to do every day, but you're so busy that you just remove the yoga out of the day. Well, maybe that wasn't the best choice of what you could remove. You want to make sure that you have the activities that you enjoy, that you're able to continue to do them. Sometimes we have to be a little bit creative in finding ways to do some of those activities, but definitely can be very helpful. Finding humor, learning how to laugh at it, looking at things in a different perspective, shifting that perspective to find what is humorous about it. So maybe it is super frustrating to not be able to, get together with your group of friends and, have tea like you're normally used to doing every Friday or something. So maybe now instead you actually do it via Zoom. And I can tell you, Zoom can be very humorous. Any virtual platform can have you can have a lot of fun with it. But then looking for, are there any positives to this experience? So maybe I've learned to knit during this time that I wasn't able to be out and about and with my friends or with my family. So maybe there are some positives to this experience. Maybe I took up a new craft, or I took up a new hobby and I've gotten really good at it. Or maybe I've, crocheted 15 blankets or something like that. So finding the positives to the experience. It's really about thinking about that glass half empty, glass half full kind of thing, right? We could certainly think, yes, it's really terrible that I can't go do the things that I want to do, but I do have a lot more downtime. Maybe I have more time to do something more positive or something different with my time that I couldn't have done before. So just looking for the positives in any experience. So another strategy called lose your mind, come to your senses. So when we talk about all of our different senses, we talk about our sight, our touch, our hearing, our taste, and our sense of smell. You can really use all of these senses to help to ground yourself into the present moment. So if you do find that you're experiencing some of those signs of isolation or loneliness, maybe this is something that you want to do to help you to be grounded in that moment. So taking a look around you and noticing what you see. This is actually a great tool to use if you are going for a walk, for example, really kind of helping you to practice a little bit of that mindfulness, right? So take a look. What colors do you see? What are you aware of? What shapes? And try naming those shapes or those colors to yourself, either to yourself in your inside voice, or you can say it out loud if you want as well. Other people might find that actually quite humorous if you do. Focusing on one particular object, though, and describing it in detail, paying as much attention to it as if you're seeing it for the first time. So, for example, here in this room, there is a wall hanging on the wall behind me. So I could look at that and say, it's rectangular, there's squares on it, there's all these geometric or geometric designs that I can see on there. So really, noticing it for the first time and really immersing yourself in that experience. And then we could talk about our sense of touch. So you could sit with your pet if you have one, for example, and just focus on the feeling of their fur as you're petting that animal. Notice how it feels. And you could also do that with a fuzzy pillow or a blanket, but something that you can actually touch and get a little bit of that sensation. You could feel the skin on your face or on your forearms. You can feel the skin on your hands or rubbing them together, any of that. You can put your hand on your chest and just notice the sensation as you feel. Perhaps there's heat, there's movement as you breathe in, and you might actually even be able to feel the beat of your heart as it's beating. And then we talk about hearing, that sense of hearing. So bring your attention really to what can I hear right now? So if I were to stop talking right now, I would hear the ticking of the clock as an example. But notice that you don't need to try to hear, it just kind of happens for you. And let those sounds come to you. And I know that some of us might not hear as best as, be able to hear as well as somebody else. And that's okay. Just let it come, let it happen. Just, not trying to force that experience in any way whatsoever. Maybe even putting on some music, because we all know that music can certainly affect how we feel, right? There might be some sort of a music that you want to listen to that is a little bit more upbeat. Music is typically kind of set up to actually, or designed to really affect your mood in different ways. And then we could talk about taste. So you might put a small piece of chocolate or some other piece of food into your mouth and bring your full attention to that. Quite often, if we are eating dinner, we are, watching TV or, doing something else at the same time, but we really want to focus on that food. Really take the time to actually enjoy it, right? Bring your full attention to that food. What's the texture of that food like? What does it feel like in your mouth? What are the different flavors? And really slow it down. It can really help. What do you notice? And then we think about our sense of smell. So get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, whatever it is you prefer, and just kind of hold that mug near your face as an example, and let the steam rise up into your face, and really tune into what it smells like. Have you ever really taken in the smell of your favorite cup of tea or your favorite cup of coffee? Or again, going back to the idea of taking a walk and finding a comfortable spot to just sit outside in nature, breathe deeply and really focus on what you can actually smell. I mean, if I were to go outside here right now, I'm probably going to smell the cars that are driving by, stuff like that. But if I were to, maybe go for a walk, I could find a park and I might be able to smell the earth. I might be able to smell flowers or trees, really experiencing that. Another thing that we can do to help with some of those, combating some of those feelings of isolation or loneliness, might be some of those deep breathing techniques. And there's a lot to be said about why we do these deep breathing techniques, but there's different things that it can actually do. But deep breathing, it actually really does help to self-regulate your body. Deep breathing can reduce those cortisol levels, which is one of those key stress hormones. But think about it. Am I breathing right now? This is something that we do so naturally. But if you've ever experienced any type of stress or anxiety, have you ever been aware of what actually does happen to your breath? We tend to hold it a little bit more, or we tend to become a little bit breathless because we're not breathing the same way. Your breath is always with us, right? But because it doesn't take a conscious effort to really breathe, we often don't even notice exactly how it is that we are breathing. But in stress or anxiety, what often happens is your breath becomes very shallow, or it becomes a little bit quicker, or it happens a little bit quicker. And if you've ever tried to really feel grounded when you're breathing this way, it's not actually very easy. So we might talk about different breathing techniques, but breathing from your diaphragm is a nice simple way to kind of look at it. So if you put your hands on your belly and you breathe deeply into your belly, you might be doing something that, maybe only you thought that only yogis did this, but deep breathing and mindfulness based stress reduction programs really do focus on that breathing and on the different breathing techniques that you might be experiencing. So really focusing on, breathing in really, really deep and breathing out really, really slow, and maybe even doing some sort of counting while you're doing that. But studies have actually shown that when we do this type of breathing technique, that slow, that deep breathing can actually help to support your body in self-regulating. It brings us right back into balance, right? So you might notice that your heart rate would go down, your blood pressure might be lowered, all those different kinds of things. So in this image that you could see here on the screen, for example, they're doing some really deep blowing out of the breath. So it's almost like blowing out a candle. So breathing in through the nose, really, really slow, and then blowing out through your mouth as if you're blowing out your candles, really releasing all of that air from your belly. Another easy breathing technique that you can do is something that we would call 4-point breathing or 4-square breathing, something like that, where you might actually breathe in through your nose, hold it to the count of 4, and breathe out through your mouth, holding that for the count of 4, and then repeating that back and forth. There's lots of different types of breathing techniques that you can practice with, but definitely focusing on your breathing can be very, very helpful in helping you to reduce some of those stressors that you might be experiencing. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the supports and things that you might be looking at. So when we talk about supports, Canadian Mental Health Association, I won't go into all of the different programs and services that we have, but as I mentioned, CMHA does actually provide free mental health support for anyone ages 16 and up in a lot of different programs. So if you are finding that you do need extra support with your mental health, you can certainly reach out to CMHA. You will see the number on the next screen actually for that. Another thing that you could do within CMHA is, as I mentioned, I'm part of the education group, and we do provide a lot of different programs and services within our group. So we'll do certification or non-certification training. But some of those certification trainings might be like mental health first aid or psychological first aid, or another great one is Living Life to the Full. So if you are looking for more information on a program like that, Living Life to the Full is a little bit more about cognitive behavioral therapy, and really learning how to replace some of those negative thoughts and attitudes and beliefs with something that's a little bit more positive. But Living Life to the Full, we actually just finished a session on Living Life to the Full geared towards older adults, which was really well received. It's something that is very, very helpful to a lot of different people. So you can always contact us if you're looking for more information on that. Four County Crisis is another support. This is a CMHA program. So the Four County Crisis line, again, I'll bring that number up in just a moment for you. This is where if you need any type of support, this could be for somebody who just needs to make that connection right through to somebody who's in active crisis. If you contact the Four County Crisis, there's somebody there 24/7 who will answer that call, and can help to direct you to the correct service, or can help to talk to you or do whatever it is that that person is requiring in that moment. If you are finding that you do require extra support and for dealing with any of the emotions that you might be experiencing right now, you can always talk to a leader in a faith community. They might be well trained in how to listen to you. And sometimes that's all we need is just to have that person who can listen to that conversation. Bounce Back program is another program that it's a CMHA program that has recently received a fair bit of funding from the government, because it is recognized that when people are reaching out to get support with their mental health, it doesn't always happen in a very timely fashion. So the Bounce Back program is a program where you would actually be set up with a coach who would actually help to guide you through some of that cognitive behavioral therapy, some of those activities to kind of make you feel better. This is not designed for somebody who's in active crisis, but if somebody has low levels of anxiety or stress, it's a fantastic program where they can receive telephone coaching from your own home. So you don't actually have to go anywhere. So it's a really cool program that people might, that again, if you need more information, you can certainly reach out to CMHA and we can provide more information on that. Therapy and counseling, again, something else that CMHA does provide, both individual as well as groups. And there's also all kinds of supports and groups in your community as well. So if you are looking, Age Friendly Peterborough, for example, we'll have all kinds of groups that will be happening for different, providing different types of supports. A lot of the stuff is being done virtually right now. You can also reach out to activity centers. There's all kinds of really great group work. You could find group yoga that's being done virtually, different things like that that you might find helpful. But also reaching out to families and friends. We've been, into this pandemic for about a year now. So we are finding that a lot of people are now starting to step back from calling their friends or family. So making sure that you do stay connected, pick up the phone, call a friend, set up some sort of a virtual session with them if you need to, like FaceTime. A lot of people will be able to help you walk through that. But it's better than not being able to see somebody at all. So there are some advantages to doing that. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of leave it at this screen. So as I mentioned, there's the Four County Crisis Line, CMHA's phone number as well, some information on Bounce Back. The Peterborough Regional Health Center also does have some great mental health resources if it is something that you need, you find you need support right in the moment, absolutely reaching out there as well. And that does bring us to the end of our session. So thank you so much for having me and listening to isolation stuff today. Enjoy the rest of your day.